Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the first ever edition of Kicking It Classic with JCD. I am your host, John JCD DiMaselli. The show is brought to you, of course, by PWP Nation. You can check out PWP Nation online at facebook.com/PWP Nation, PWPNation.com, and at PWP Nation on Twitter. You could check me out, facebook.com/John DiMaselli, and at NYC1219. This is a new series, and what it's going to focus on is some older shows, events, stories, and we're going to review them and look back at what became of certain things and what from there. It's no sense, we could review the shows of today. But can you really talk about a show from 30 years ago, let's say? And that's what we're hoping to do, and we hope you'll enjoy it. The first show we're going to review is a show that was a pretty basic show up until the last two matches of the night, one of which because it involved a major story and a major controversy, and the other match because WCW officials fell asleep on the Maryland State Athletic Commission. The show I'm referencing is, of course, WCW Great American Bash 1991. WCW was coming off their usual year. Ric Flair had just regained the world title from Sting in January. He entered into a controversial angle with Tatsumi Fujinami over the finish of a match in Japan. They had to bring it to the States and conclude it there. And Flair went over. And now the stage was set for Flair to defend the title and finally drop it to Lex Luger. And everything seemed fine. And then about 4 days before the event, you started to hear about issues with Flair and Jim Herd, who was just recently put in charge of WCW. And then they were having issues, talk about contract issues, creative issues. And then one night, I want to say it was in Atlanta during the Great American Bash Tour, which WCW used to run, WCW made this announcement. This could be the decision on the within the last 48 hours. Within the last 48 hours, ladies and gentlemen, Executive Vice President of World Championship Wrestling, Jim Herd, and the Championship Committee have stripped Nature Boy Ric Flair of his WCW Championship. Now, for those of you who could not make out the audio, it's 29 years old. Basically, that was former WCW announcer Gary Michael Competa announcing that Ric Flair had been stripped of the title. Again, this was done at a house show that they made the announcement. I want to say it was maybe the Thursday before. The event was on a Sunday. And basically what would happen is Flair's match with Luger, which many people had expected Flair would finally put Luger over, basically turned into Flair leaving the company about 48 to 72 hours before the event. And it would ruin what was going to be a steel cage match between Flair and Luger. No outside interference from the Four Horsemen. Sting was backing up Luger. There was that crazy Robo-Cop angle from the pay-per-view before. So that, that was just one of those crazy things. But it was going to pay off with Luger finally getting that win over Flair. And unfortunately, it wouldn't happen. As far as the card itself goes, this was a pretty basic card. as far as what WCW would run. Here are the quick results. We're going to get into it. First off, the event took place on July 14th, 1991 in Baltimore, Maryland at the Baltimore Arena, which was a big WCW venue. It had 9,320 people in attendance, which was standard. Okay, so with the results, here we go. The opener, which was a dark match, Junkyard Dog defeated Black Bart. The opener on the pay-per-view was a scaffold match, which WCW NWA was pretty big on at the time. You had a weird team of PN News and former television champion Bobby Eaton defeat current TV champion Stunning Steve Austin. Whatever happened to that guy? And Terrence Taylor. Austin and Eaton made sense to have chemistry together. However, I can't even begin to remember, and maybe I should have watched the event. This is my first time doing this first show, so maybe before I do the next episodes, I'll watch the event again. How News and Taylor got involved, I don't know. The Diamond Stud, Scott Hall, defeats Tom Zink in what would be considered an upset, but would make sense where the next year would go. Ron Simmons defeats Oz, who was Kevin Nash. And with the push the character was getting, it was one of the first characters, Oz, that had this really over-the-top big entrance with effects and lighting and smoke and all that. And then Simmons defeats him in under 8 minutes. That was pretty something. It was like, wow. But, where Simmons' career would go the next year and a half after that, it made a ton of sense. Richard Morton, who joined the York Foundation, with Alexander York, who was Terry Reynolds, defeated Robert Gibson. They actually broke up the Rock and Roll Express for a short period of time. In an elimination match, Dustin Rhodes and the Young Pistols, Tracy Smothers and Steve Armstrong, defeat the Fabulous Freebirds, which was made of Michael Hayes, Jimmy Garvin, and Badstreet, who was Brad Armstrong under a mask. That was an elimination match. I believe Dustin was the survivor. He was. The Yellow Dog, Brian Pillman's gimmick after he had lost a Loser Leaves WCW match to Barry Windham, defeats Johnny B. Bad by DQ when holla, Teddy Long interferes trying to take the mask off the Yellow Dog to prove it was Pillman, because there was a stipulation that if the dog was proven to be Pillman would be gone from WCW forever. Big Josh, Matt Bourne, defeated Black Blood, former Hercules Hernandez, in a lumberjack match. El Gigante's push continued, coming off his big win over Sid Vicious in what would be Sid's swan song. Defeats the one-man gang. Nikita Koloff defeated Sting in a Russian chain match. This was actually set up the month before when, during the Steiner brothers defending the tag titles against Sting and Lex Luger, Koloff would interfere and cost Sting and Luger the match. So they had a chain match to do that. Now this is where things get a little more crazy. So the main event of the show was supposed to be Ric Flair defending the WCW title against Lex Luger in a steel cage. Obviously, as we stated earlier in the show, that doesn't happen. Flair departs the company. The title is declared vacant. Now, WCW used to have an extensive ranking system at the time. They would have, the champion and then the top-ranked contenders. The top-ranked contender was usually the United States champion, more often than not, and then you'd have the contenders under it. So Luger was, of course, the number one contender. So when they made the announcement that Flair was stripped of the title, they announced that, and this makes total sense, Luger, being the number one contender, would battle the number two contender for the title inside a cage. That was Barry Windham. Okay. Two guys who hadn't held a world title were going to get a chance to be a champion. This fantastic. The problem is the match doesn't main event the show. It's second to last. So that kind of takes away something from it already that, you had built this up, and this was, even in 1991, you didn't need the internet, you didn't need the dirt sheets. You knew this was going to be Luger's night and Luger's moment. There was no doubt about that. The match goes about 13 minutes, and for the most part, it's a pretty good match. Lex Luger's at the time, was a pretty decent worker. Barry Windham is a pretty good worker as well. So, it was fine. The match itself, again, throughout the match, knowing how it was going to end, it was a typical Lex Luger was the face. He was the United States champion. Him and Windham back and forth. No one really played their roles too much to the extreme, which is fine. I would say about 95% into the match. Well, no, actually, let's go back before that. When you watch TV, you've gotten used to the fact that when you see the cameramen move, something's going to happen. And you see there's a wide-angle shot of the cage and the crowd, and you see the camera guys getting in position to the ramp. And as you can see fans start to look up and turn towards that way to see what's going on. There's probably about 45 seconds of nothing. And then all of a sudden, Harley Race and Curtis Hughes come out. And they come down the ramp, and all of a sudden they're affiliated with Luger, which was very weird and, confusing. So Race goes to Luger in the corner, doesn't do anything illegal, he signals Luger to do a pile driver. And Luger does. He hits the pile driver on Windham, which Luger had never done before. His finish was always the torture rack. Harley Race used a pile driver as his finish. So he hits the pile driver on Windham, pins him 1, 2, 3. The crowd goes nuts. The crowd was excited. Luger got a pop. It was very quick. They handed him the title. Nothing. There was no post-match attack on Windham. Heck, even as they're walking up the ramp, Race is pointing the crowd off to Luger, like, yeah, he's the new champ. No indication that Luger has turned heel at all. No explanation to the crowd, no nothing. The crowd, like I said, the crowd is reacting. Luger's celebrating. Race is celebrating. Nothing. Windham just stands there. There was no post-match attack on Windham. No nothing. So apparently they ran an angle, and I have to look for it if we can get it, on WCW Saturday Night. And we have it, so let's go to that promo.
You are looking at the new WCW World Heavyweight Champion, the Total Package, Lex Luger.
The Total Package has got a message for the rest of the world.
Exactly right, Harley. A shot around the world just moments ago. What we're talking about, there's no frivolity here. What we're talking about is a satisfaction and a job well done, a job long overdue. What we're talking about is the past right here has been forgotten. New history is being made. This is the dawning of a totally new era of the Total Package. Lex Luger, I have arrived. Get used to this face. Get used to this body, because there's nothing like it. Total Package Lex Luger is going to establish a sphere of dominance this sport has never seen. Let this be a message to all wannabe wrestlers, all star wrestlers of now, all has-been wrestlers, because the Total Package Lex Luger has finally arrived. There's been an attitude adjustment, so to speak. Barry Windham received an attitude adjustment like any other wrestler who stands in my path. There's a new frame of mind for Lex Luger. The physical tools were always there. I just had to be made to believe in myself and my abilities and grab it by the throat. And that's what I did just moments ago.
Putting a man into a frame of mind is the thing that this man likes. It's there now. The Total Package is all together.
So there, So there you have it. So there's Luger's promo, and that promo ran on all of WCW shows Saturday night, Worldwide Pro, explaining the heel turn. Now, the problem is you still had one more match to go. That was an advertised 6-person mixed tag with the Steiner Brothers and Missy Hyatt going up against Arn Anderson, Barry Windham, and Paulie Dangerously. Now, obviously, Windham gets pulled for the title match, which actually worked out because Scott Steiner was actually injured. So he was pulled from the match, and it made sense. You could pull Windham, put him in a title match. Fine, no problem. You're going to get Rick Steiner and Missy Hyatt against Arn Anderson and Paul Heyman. Paulie Dangerously, I should say. Here's the problem. WCW had long ran Maryland. I mean, Baltimore was one of their homes. I mean, as much as everyone associates them with Atlanta, I mean, Maryland's right there. If Atlanta was 1, Baltimore, Maryland was 1A as far as WCW's range of operations go. So they advertised the match. Now, the main gist of it is the Maryland State Athletic Commission was never going to let any type of mixed wrestling, intergender wrestling happen at any show in Maryland. I mean, you know, it's not what it is. We're not talking about today where it's much more common. We're talking 1991. And also, WCW should have known better running there. So they run this angle. Now, mind you, they've got about 6 minutes left in the show. And Jim Ross and Tony Schiavone actually acknowledged that there's not a lot of TV time left. And this was WCW at the time. So they do the entrances for the match. Then they do this quick angle where Dick Murdoch and Dick Slater, who were a tag team called the Hardliners at the time, kidnapped Missy Hyatt. That's the cover for the Athletic Commission not allowing the intergender. So the match turns into Rick Steiner versus Paulie Dangerously and Arn Anderson. The match goes about 2 minutes and 9 seconds, and Rick Steiner wins. WCW closed their second flagship pay-per-view of the year, because Starrcade was their WrestleMania. The Great American Bash was their SummerSlam. Heck, you could even make a case that the Great American Bash was SummerSlam before there was SummerSlam. And they closed it with Rick Steiner pinning Arn Anderson. It was a bad look. It was a bad scene for the company. It was a lot of flux. And it was just a rushed angle, which how anybody thought they could pull this off, I still to this day don't know. I don't know if it was Jim Herd. I don't know if it was the administration beforehand who booked the show, whoever, but somebody definitely fell asleep at the wheel and totally screwed WCW on this. And, you know, why that main event did, why not have the Luger match main event? That never made any sense to me. Is even with the, you know, the heel turn being what it was, why do you not main event that? You still could have ran the angle with Hyatt and all that, done a quick match with Rick Steiner, and then turned around and ran the Luger match. That doesn't make sense. The only thing I could think of is maybe it was for time, but we'll never know. Maybe I got to tweet at Eric Bischoff. He was around at that time. You know, Bischoff's good. Every now and then he answers stuff. But we'll see. As far as the fallout from the show, I mean, Luger had a pretty good run. He did some rematches with Windham. I know he feuded with Ron Simmons for a while. He was a pretty dominant heel. Eventually, his run would end at Super Brawl in February to Sting, and that's when Luger was departing the company to head to WWF. You know, Sting stayed relevant for the most part because he's Sting. The Dangerous Alliance was in their early stages of forming. And, you know, that's really it. I mean, a lot of guys fluctuated. Oz, Diamond Stud, Black Blood, Big Josh. I mean, those guys kind of came and went. You started to see more from Dustin Rhodes, Barry Windham as a face. Brian Pillman ended up getting reinstated. Johnny B. Bad ended up turning face shortly after. So for the most part, I mean, most of the roster coming out of the show that actually stayed active were okay. I mean, as far as that Flair kid goes,
What is that? This happens to be the real championship belt.
That's not Hogan's belt, Brain. I know the champ's belt when I see it.
You're right. Comparing this belt to Hulk Hogan's belt would be like comparing ice cream to horse manure. Comparing the men that wear these belts would also be like comparing ice cream to horse manure. You see, the man that owns this belt is right now under contract to another organization. But in the very near future, he might be coming to the World Wrestling Federation. The man is also a very long, dear, personal friend of mine.
Does the guy have a name?
Yes, he has a name. This man not only has challenged Hogan on numerous occasions, unanswered, may I add, but you want to compare him, fine. Then let's compare Hulk Hogan to Ric Flair.
so yeah, Flair would end up eventually in WWF. He would end up there quite quickly. I think those promos with Heenan and those teases with Heenan started running late July, early August. I know they did one. I know Heenan appeared at SummerSlam 91 with the belt, the NWA World title, the big gold belt, before Flair had to start using the WWF Tag Team title belt, and that's what got blurred out. But I know Heenan was at SummerSlam. Flair would debut in September, so he ended up fine. It was just a weird time for WCW, and this show was just, a staple of that. There's not much else really to say about it. It was what it was. It was typical WCW at the time. It was WCW being WCW. So that's all for this week. Again, I am John JCD DiMaselli. I want to thank you for listening. I want to thank PWP Nation again for giving me a platform for this show. Our next episode, which will come the week of July 11th, will focus on Survivor Series 92. And what people may not remember is there were a couple of firings that led to a lot of rebooking on that show, and it clustered up. As far as where Kicking It Classic with JCD will go, this is going to be our first season. We are going to do 6 episodes weekly, except for in between episode 5 and episode 6. That will have a 2-week gap due to some personal reasons. But I hope you check the episodes out. Again, I am your host, John JCD DiMaselli. I'm hoping maybe as the show goes on, maybe to get some guests to discuss some of these shows. Heck, maybe even if we get lucky, we'll get somebody who is actually on the shows. But, I want to get some guests to discuss the shows. This way you guys don't have to just listen to me babble and my view about it. But again, thank you for listening. Until next week, see you then.